Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Dave Hudson, who's come to us to speak today. Dave was born and raised in New England. He's the son of a liberal Methodist minister and grandson of a professor of theology at Boston University, the alma mater of Martin Luther King Jr. In 1981, he and his wife Kate found Unitarian Universalism in Geneva, Illinois, and 7 years later they moved here to Marietta, Georgia, where they raised 3 sons. Both Dave and Kate are active at the Unitarian Universalist Metro Atlanta North congregation, also known as UUMAN, it's the UU congregation in Roswell. Dave has also been a congregational consultant for the UUA's southern region, and he has spoken at UU congregations throughout Georgia. And we welcome Dave to our pulpit. Thanks, man.
And it's a pleasure to be with you. I want to thank the choir for singing my absolute favorite song. Often when I'm feeling the need for inspiration, I pull out my Jim Scott CD and play that song over and over again when my wife isn't around. And it always brings me to tears, as it did this morning. Thank you. Who are you, Don Draper? Asks his wife Betty as she leans over her sleeping husband in the first episode of the television series Mad Men. Draper himself doesn't know. In fact, he's clueless, as we say. He has spent his life fleeing from a confusing and painful childhood, even assuming a new identity, and attempting to find meaning, comfort, and security in sensory indulgence, the numbing alcoholic buzz, and achievement in the fast, high-powered world of Madison Avenue in the 60s. Draper had it all: a prestigious job, a beautiful, loving wife, adorable kids, a comfortable home in a comfortable New York suburb, but it was not enough to address his basic existential angst, his identity, and the purpose of his life. In my late teenage years, when my father, a liberal Methodist minister and social activist, the radical priest as I called him, was going through his own identity crisis, he used to repeat at the dinner table his mantra of the time. He would say, "The 2 most important questions in your life are, who am I and what do I want to do with my life?" He didn't know himself. And at 18, I had no clue. I thrashed around in despair through my emerging adulthood, trying to figure it out, fleeing notions of the perfect minister's kid, A student, and so forth, trying on new personas and identities, rebel, good time Charlie, all of which is a normal part of development, if not always as dramatic as my experience. For the next 35 years, I was a variety of things: teacher, husband, father, sales manager, businessman, congregational president. I was not unhappy, but the fundamental question or questions remained, if only beneath the surface. Who am I? And how do I want to be in or relate to the world? My reframing of my father's question, what do I want to do with my life? My attributes and abilities and achievements are a part of who I am. They paint a picture of me, but they are not fundamentally who I am, as they are not for Don Draper, handsome guy with beautiful wife and kids, talented ad man. When we are no longer the star student or athlete, when a lover abandons us, when our spouse dies, when our kids leave home and we lose the role of nurturer, when we lose a job, when we retire, who are we? My youngest brother, with 2 high-achieving older brothers, struggled in school and for years afterward with a sense of his own worth and value, with who he was. Fortunately, in his early adulthood, he found a counselor, therapist, who helped him over a period of some 6 years to come to know himself, to feel worthy. And some years later, he had an experience that he has called religious, an epiphany, that ironically, in its near tragic nature, brought him to a place of peace. He is a forester in northern New Hampshire, whose main business is helping small landowners with woodland management and landscape design, restoring old meadows, thinning overgrown forests, building cross-country skiing and walking trails. About 15 years ago, he was working behind the house of a client in the town of Hanover, felling an old, diseased sugar maple. As he sawed through it, he discovered that it was hollow near its base. His sawing made it unstable. It split and fell toward him. He told me, "In that split second, I made the conscious decision, taking control of my life, to place myself in the best position for survival." He credits the therapy he'd done years before for the confidence it took to take this action. He went on, "I actually told the tree to take its best shot because I knew that I was going to win. And then I turned my back to the tree at the exact moment to position myself for survival. As a forester, I knew that if I could get positioned at the intersection of the trunk and branches, where there's a space held up by the hardwood branches, there I had the best chance for survival. The other option, running in fear and trying to outrun the crown of the tree, like outrunning life itself, perhaps, was extremely risky and sure death. The trunk fell directly on him, pinning him to the ground, driving one hip out of its socket and through his skin. His client witnessed this, and in a matter of minutes, an ambulance was there. The EMTs removed the tree and began to resuscitate him. As I lay under the tree, he said, fear and the flight instinct took a brief hold. Once again, I made the conscious choice to live. I was close to the same age as my father when he passed away. My daughter was the same age as my younger sister at that time, and I told myself that that was not going to happen. I wasn't leaving her alone, period. I devised a plan to survive. I knew that I had to calm down to reduce blood pressure issues for my heart. I focused on taking one breath at a time under the weight of the tree. That was my mission in that moment. The EMTs brought him back from the edge of death, from no heartbeat or breath. I saw my life and I saw death, he told me again just a few weeks ago. And death wasn't so bad. It didn't hurt. I was ready to go with it when they brought me back. But lying under the tree, focusing on taking one breath at a time, he experienced a profound epiphany. That's when it became clear to me, he said, that all I had to look forward to in this life was taking my next breath. Life is as simple as that. The hard work he had done proved to have prepared him for the magnitude of this event and for that epiphany, the visceral understanding of the miracle simply of being alive, a knowing that is difficult for the rest of us, but by no means impossible, that every day is a gift and every aspect of creation a joy and delight. And about a month ago, I heard Tim's story. He's the carpenter who was doing much of the renovation work on a house my wife Kate and I purchased recently in Beaufort, South Carolina. When I asked him how it was that he had migrated there from upstate New York, he said he had come with his sister. She had moved to Hilton Head for a job. He was out of work, on disability, suffering from depression. He'd killed himself twice, he said. A year before, he had gone home to his 120-acre farm in New York to find that his wife had left him, taking their children and many of his things, including his horses. His life seemed to have dissolved in an instant. Despondent, he drove into his garage, locked it from the inside, piped the exhaust from his car directly into the vehicle, climbed in, cranked up Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, and waited for the end. A neighbor heard the car running and called the fire department, who broke in, resuscitated him, brought him back from dead. A week later, he was discharged from the hospital, and he attempted to kill himself again by the same method. There, in the hospital, again, he'd seen a vision. A man standing at the end of his bed. God, Jesus, his father, he didn't know. But this figure had told him that he was only harming his physical body. Didn't he know that he was going to heaven anyway? This destruction of the body was not going to change that. This time, Tim was sent to a mental hospital where he spent 6 months. How did they decide to let you out? I asked. I was driving the other patients crazy, he said with a grin on his face. I was under a lot of medication, like the rest of them. They released me to the supervision of a doctor with prescriptions for 15 medications. Sometime later, on the interstate near Albany, New York, Tim parked his truck on the side of the highway and wandered off into a swamp, where the police found him and took him to his sister. He developed a kind of amnesia induced by over-medication, he thought. His doctor reduced his medication, which helped. He moved to Beaufort, and disappointed with the mental health care he was receiving, he stopped seeing doctors and taking medication, and he turned to Jesus. If you're real, he said, help me. He had turned to Reformed Judaism years before, believing that God was one, not two or three, but now he asked Jesus for help, and apparently he helped. My life is straightened out. I don't have much, but I have a loving wife whom I rescued from alcoholism, and I have a skill, and I have enough work to sustain me. Not long ago, I lost everything I'd accumulated since I came down here after a bad fall prevented me from working, but I don't need much. Sure, I'd like things, but I don't need them. What is the common thread that runs through these two stories and that is absent in Don Draper's? I believe that both my brother and Tim the carpenter are in touch with the miracle of life in a way that gives their life meaning and richness, that gives them an identity, a sense of worth, and a sense of purpose that sustains them. Perhaps you know of Rebecca Parker, the UU minister, theologian, and president of Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California. In the story about her near suicide, she says, quote, "Nothing can separate us from the love of God," end quote. By other names, the love of God is also the spirit of life and the spirit and power of love. Nothing can separate us from them. They are always there. They are a fundamental aspect of life and creation. They are there if we make ourselves accessible to them. My brother did some difficult work around that access and then had it knocked into him, as it were. Tim sensed it and appealed to it, the love of God, the spirit of life and love. If you're real, Jesus, I need your help. For isn't that who and what Jesus is for those who are really in touch with the significance of his life and message? The ultimate unity of body and spirit, the holiness of the whole of creation, the divinity of all. Franciscan priest Richard Rohr says that the word Christ means precisely that, the unity of matter and spirit in the whole of creation. Wasn't Jesus' core message that we are all worthy because we are, because we exist, that it is all worthy? That's a UU message, if I ever heard one. Some might ask, What is the point of religion for those who don't believe in God? By which they usually mean a supernatural mover and shaker, bearded cloud sitter, and scepter wielder. The question isn't one of belief. It's a question of being. It's a question of the nature of human existence, which is to be fundamentally connected to the whole of creation, to be full participants in it, to be card-carrying, full-fledged members of its glory. We are stardust, as Joni Mitchell sang at Woodstock. Yes, we are, and stardust we will be again. We participate in religion and religious community because there we might get closer to that understanding, an understanding that Buddhists and others call enlightenment. And we participate in religion and religious community to experience the peace that accompanies that enlightenment or understanding, a peace that can be called grace. Grace because there's nothing we can do to create it. We can make ourselves accessible to it, let it into our lives, but it simply is the nature of existence. Religion, at its best, when it is more than what Rohr calls our personal salvation project, religion, at its best, addresses our fundamental existential angst, our core wounds of isolation, loneliness, separateness, and unworthiness. Regardless of how we experience and interpret the mystery, wonder, and power of life, regardless of our concept of the divine, wherever we are on the atheist-theist continuum, religion, at its best, provides us with a sense of worthiness and belonging. Here at Emerson, as we might in other churches of many stripes, you experience worthiness. You come to know, I trust, that regardless of your abilities and your histories, your heritage, your baggage, your IQ, your gender, your sexual orientation, your age, you are worthy. And here you experience belonging on a number of levels. The immediate level of daily interaction and belonging in community, and, if you are paying attention, the more fundamental sense of belonging that can flow from that experience of worthiness, the sense of belonging to the whole of creation. If we engage in religion at its best, which you have here, I believe, we come to know that being is not having, that being is more than personal attributes or roles, that being is simply breathing. It is participating in the mystery and wonder of creation, participating in the miracle of simply walking on the earth, as Thich Nhat Hanh says. My brother discovered it under the tree. Tim the carpenter in the hospital bed. I am discovering it in my own UU congregation, where I've experienced loving community and where I'm encouraged to explore the big questions, as many of you are. I don't know how Don Draper's life will play out. There will be at least one more season, thankfully, some of us say. But I believe that he will never find peace or discover who he is until he comes to know that he is not alone, as Anna Draper suggested in that dramatic episode in the cottage in Southern California. Don, she said, actually, Dick, she said, the only thing that's keeping you from being happy is the belief that you are alone. Nothing could be truer or more profound. It seems so simple, and it is, but how hard it is to see and to know deeply. If religion means to bind together again, to make whole, then it is about clearing away the layers of edifice in our lives that obscure our true nature. It is about creating an environment that supports our rediscovery of ourselves and our connections to all of creation. So in our religious communities, Emerson and Human, we can and do experience in our own ways the soul-nurturing awareness, subliminal or unconscious, that we are not alone, that we are worthy of love, that participating in the miracle of life and creation, we are buoyed by its irrepressible spirit through tragedy and trauma and disappointment. The same spirit that pushes up plants from the rubble of Hiroshima or Mount St. Helens, or from the leaf litter in our backyards. The other day, while visiting, my brother said, "Isn't the eye a marvelous thing? Cells in the retina receiving light and sending nervous impulses to the brain to become images." And I remarked, "And isn't it remarkable how the snake on the rock down there sees in essentially the same way, and the frog in the pond trying to avoid it, and the dragonfly on the lily pad?" Evidence of our connection to and participation in the whole is everywhere. Here we hold it up and celebrate it. That is religion in my book. May it continue to be.